Hello, welcome back again to this podcast. It's certainly been a while, I think probably about 2 weeks to be specific. Today, we just want to come back and talk to you about something that we've been going through, which is all about
significant loss. So if you've seen our short that we said we couldn't record, we lost 2 people in our lives on the same day, which was it was a really, really hard day. And all of you who knew those people, we know that it was a hard day for you as well.
Yeah.
Hard week, still recovering from that. And our love goes out to the families of Brother George Martin, the late Brother George Martin, and the late Brother Enoch Tatani.
Who were really close friends to us, by the way.
Really,
both of them. Yeah.
Really close to us. But both have lived legendary lives. And honestly, just looking at all the memorials and the speeches that people gave about them, we can just see that their lives just lived a real testament of God and of his love and of his grace. And so we take that away. We're really inspired by that.
And I know we're going to come to that in the second part of this video, but I think one thing that I wanted to touch on was how, for both of them, I think, there was an element of celebration of the lives that they'd lived and the impact that they'd had on the people that they'd come into contact with.
Oh my gosh, such impact.
Yeah.
I was so truly inspired when watching Enoch's funeral about how God used him and just his absolute faith. It was just amazing.
Yeah.
So yeah, just really appreciative of that. And today we're going to be talking about significant loss and the impact of it on our lives, because it does have an impact. And sometimes it can impact on us positively, where we become inspired and where we take a positive step forward in our life. And sometimes they can impact on us negatively, especially when we don't deal with grief properly, when we maybe bury it, ignore it, pretend it's not happening.
Yeah.
And we've had moments in our lives where we've had some grief that has triggered some positive steps forward in our life, and then others which have, for me personally, crippled me and changed my entire worldview.
So I think one of the things that'd be really interesting to talk about are the cultural differences when it comes to dealing with grief or loss in general. And so in thinking about ourselves, you know, I'm curious to hear, Bethel, how do you deal with grief?
I have different responses depending on which side of the family I am with. So if I'm with my British side, it's very stiff upper lip. It's very much, oh, so sad. You know, dry your tears. Make sure that your makeup doesn't run. Not that I wear makeup, but for those who do. And it's very, I would say, surface level. I don't think anyone really shows how they're truly feeling. We greet each other. Everyone looks very posh and nice. And, you know, we have a cup of tea afterwards and we chill and we relax. And it's all very poised. And then I've got the African side where you go there and from the minute somebody walks in the door, every time somebody new walks in the door, it's like, you start crying, bawling your eyes out, literally screaming if you want to scream, just doing whatever you want to do, literally just showing your grief, right?
I think it's interesting because, and I know this might sound a little bit controversial, you know, from just what you just said there. I think one side, take for example, like, you know, if you're thinking about the African side, I think they are very animated and sometimes over the top.
For Mark.
Yeah.
Mark has a more British response.
And then, well, I was going to say, and then you got on the British side, I think sometimes it can be a little pretentious because people are playing up to this facade or this image of, you know, I'm doing okay and and yet it's actually not how they're feeling truly. Yeah. So I think we're talking here about the middle ground.
Trying to find balance. But I think more so what I've realized growing up is that as a child, you experience grief in different ways because you experience grief through the eyes of your grown-ups, right? So when I was a child, my mum lost her mother and everybody kind of cried and, you know, they'll constantly talk about my grandmother and that kind of stuff. So that was kind of a normal way of dealing with it, right? Then as I grew up, I lost my uncle when I was 19. And that was the first one that I really remember losing somebody significant and the response of my family. That was in 2009. I remember crying and going through all the motions and, you know, we went to Zimbabwe for the funeral and that was like a pivotal moment in my life because it was like a cathartic experience. Catharsis is when you find healing in that in the experience that you're going through. And I went to Zimbabwe. It was the first time back in nearly 10 years. And it kind of hit me. Like, it hit me the amount of privilege that I have in England. Especially when I went to go and try and open the water tap and it didn't run, and I went, oh my gosh, what's going on? Because we have running water all the time.
There's no water?
There's no running water. The outrage. I
thought the Romans sorted it out.
And my grandmother just laughed. But just going through that experience of experiencing his death and going to the funeral, and in Zimbabwean tradition, or my culture specifically, my family, I don't know if it's the same for your family, but we bury our dead. So instead of getting the people to shovel the dirt, we shovel it as a family. So after they've buried the person, we'll take the shovel and we will put the earth on top of the casket. And that moment is actually quite finalizing. It's quite
it's like closure.
It gives you that closure, like, okay, we've laid them to rest and we've done this together collectively as a family. And it really does bring healing in that moment. And funny enough, on my uncle's funeral, one of my other uncles, as he was shoveling in, his glasses fell in. I think they were Ray-Bans.
Oh, wow.
So everyone made a huge joke about it, that like his brother wanted his glasses.
That's a costly affair.
It was costly. Ray-Bans, dude.
Costly.
He was just like, it's fine. I'm not going to go in after them, am I?
Really? Well, you actually left them?
Yeah, well, are you going to jump into the grave to get Ray-Bans?
That's a controversial question. I think most people would be like,
would you jump in the grave to get your Ray-Bans?
Yeah, I need my Ray-Bans.
Pause. But funny enough, I wasn't at the next funeral of my other uncle, but apparently the same thing happened. He lost a second pair of glasses. They were playing with him, actually.
Maybe he owed the money. And it was time to pay back his dues.
So funny. But that was such a healing experience. And I remember that was actually my first time of actually seeking the Lord's face on something. That was when I was still in a relationship with somebody that I thought I was going to get married to. And for the first time in a long time, because that was when I was in my wilderness journey, I prayed. And I was like, God, is this person for me? Because I think experiencing all that difference in life in Zimbabwe just made me press pause and go, reevaluate. Is your life actually going well? Is it going well? You know, and then that death, that significant moment of...
That was a moment of recollection.
Where am I going? You know, when I pass away, like what's going on? So that triggered me on my faith journey, really. That was the beginning of my faith journey. So...
I suppose with every death that you experience, there's this moment of, I guess, like you said, evaluation of if this is to be the end for us all in that sense. You know, am I living true to who I am? Am I doing my best?
Am I getting the best out of life?
You know, am I getting the best out of life? And so...
And where am I going?
And where am I going? If not, then I need to reevaluate. And in that case, you were having that moment of like,
100%.
actually, is this what life is all about for me?
Like, I think I'm living the high life, but when it all boils down to it, am I really? Probably not. So that was a positive move forward for me.
And I think it was quite interesting. You were talking about how, you know, the whole family comes together and they help in putting the dirt into, you know, the grave. And I wonder, because you were talking about how that brings about healing. So I'm wondering from a commitment level, or maybe even from a participation level, whether that does something in terms of, you know, I'm helping out part of this process, and so that means I'm like showing my appreciation for the person, or maybe, like you said, you know, linked to the closure thing.
I think it's more about the closure. The commitment to the person is done more like in the wake and the cooking and the rituals after that. Like, I feel like the burying it's very like ashes to ashes, dust to dust, dust to dust, ashes to ashes. You know, and you're part of that process. You're literally taking that dust and you're literally putting them back into the earth where they came from. And
when we say everyone, are we talking about male, female,
everybody.
Or is it just... Right, okay.
Literally everyone. So children as well. So with the children, they don't take the shovel, but a shovel is held out for them to take a handful, and then they throw some in. So yeah, everybody gets involved. And it's really, I really love it. You know, when we first came to England, which we'll talk about my grandfather's death later, but when we did it for my grandfather's death, people were a bit like, the English people were like, well, because normally we leave the graves, we leave it open in England, which for me, I don't like that thought of like, we've left the grave open. What's going to happen to it? Could they take the body? No, you know what I mean? But it's like, but we said, no, we want to bury our grandfather, and we did.
Because I'm wondering about, like, and I'm probably digressing here, but I'm wondering about how you know, whether that's connected to this idea of, you know, people have been so kind of bottled up, you know, and not really showing the emotions. And you've got this moment now where it's like, you know, this is the final thing that you can do to show your...
But that's my mum's side of the family. So my mum's side of the family are not bottled up at all. They cry.
Right, okay.
They ball their eyes up.
Okay.
My dad's side of the family is where things are very, like, people are cremated. Not that there's anything wrong with cremation, but it's very peaceful and quiet and serene. Like when my uncle was cremated, you know, the coffin just kind of went behind a curtain and the curtain closed. It was just this beautiful music and everybody kind of walked out so peacefully and serenely that it didn't almost hit home for me. Not that, do you know what I mean? I loved that it was so peaceful, but it wasn't like, I didn't have that closure moment, if that makes sense.
And I guess I'm wondering also about, I know, Beth, I'm asking you a lot of questions, but you know, everything that you're saying is triggering a lot of things for me, because I'm thinking about the body keeps a score. And so here you've got a score where, I don't know whether that's actually, you know, go into the motions like we're talking about here. If things aren't dealt with properly, you know, that could kind of show in some other way. And so where everything's bottled up and the body's keeping the score, I am wondering whether there's any kind of research to say, you know, after maybe 3, 6 months, 9 months, that's where you find somebody sort of break down and just go,
well, I don't think there's a time frame for breaking down,
yeah,
because it could be years, and we'll talk about that in the second video, part 2. Do not miss part 2, where we talk about how I thought I was okay with our pregnancy loss, and then later, 5 years later, I realized actually I haven't actually dealt with this, and it just came back. And sometimes it's when the body feels safe, when the body feels that they're in a safe place and they can deal with this now, then it's like, okay, hold on, there's something that's missing there that we haven't quite managed. Can we bring this up and deal with this? And sometimes you can act out subconsciously, not knowing, like when we talk about trauma, not knowing where it's coming from. And it's actually because you haven't dealt with that grief, you haven't dealt with that significant loss in your life.
And I think it's interesting, obviously, because you mentioned that, and then the contrast of having faith on top of that. So where we're Christians and we believe that, obviously, when people die, they go to heaven, and it's a space where, you know, once we all die, all the rapture's taken place, we're all going to meet again on one glorious day. And so for me,
there's like hope in that.
There's hope in that. And how that has an impact on how I deal with grief. So, for example, I remember when we lost, we call him the General, but that's, for most people, that's Brother Mavadenge. Some call him Brother Mev. And so when we lost him...
By the way, Chris pause. Brother Mavadenge was like, I don't know, a legend.
Well, it's in the name. We called him the General because to us he represented what Joshua was, where he stood up for what was right, he did what was needed to be done, and he helped everyone achieve what they needed to do, just like how Joshua was able to place everyone.
He was like our Sunday school superintendent, which he oversaw all like the youth program.
And he helped develop all the young people into leaders, so he had a plan and a strategy for actually getting everybody up to speed and becoming these leaders for tomorrow. Exactly. You know, and so he commanded so much respect.
And just the way that his walk was just like Jesus would. Honestly, he was just amazing. He was another pivotal person.
That reminds me of The Chosen. Now speaking about that, he does.
Exactly.
You know, I can see him as one of the characters. In fact, the character of Jesus, just how he was.
It's just amazing.
Personable, likeable, very simple.
Just before he passed away, you know, he had collected like 12 people, ironically, and he was like, well, he didn't tell us that he was going to pass away, but we very well knew that he knew because the things he did leading up to his death. And he was like, okay, you guys are going to be the leaders of tomorrow, all the stuff. And we're like, okay, fine, just go with the flow. Yeah. But when he passed away, I broke down.
Yeah, I do remember that. Beth actually broke down. And
oh my God. My world was just crushed. I was just like, what? I just cried. I literally just bawled. And I couldn't understand it because I'd just seen him like a week before or something. And he was fine, seemingly fine. He obviously knew what he was going through. He didn't tell anybody. I was just broken.
I think the contrast is I had worked with him for the past, I think, 3 years or something. And at every stage, there was something he was teaching me. And so it was interesting leading up to his death. I mean, even after he died, I think the process I went through was bizarre because, yes, I felt this incredible loss, but at the same time, I felt this heartwarming sense of like,
peace.
He's okay. And I want to see him again. And if anything, I always remember his voice and the way he called me, which is Mark, in a very kind of distinct way. Yeah. And so that's what, and I guess it's bizarre how I deal with grief because even in that moment, Beth was asking me, for somebody you worked with for so long and you were so close, surely aren't you meant to be like breaking down and having these moments of just like,
what on earth?
Yeah. But I think I do remember a couple of days after that, I was alone, and probably for about, I don't know, maybe 5 minutes or something, I just kind of stopped. And my eyes just watered up. And I guess that's when it was the moment of like,
realization.
Yeah, probably realization, and also just the actual, realization of he's no longer here. And the role that he played, and the difference that he made, to an extent, was probably never going to be felt again.
Never.
And we were going to have to go in a completely different direction.
Irreplaceable.
But I think also an appreciation for, wow, here's somebody who, as the Bible says, prudent, looked ahead and thought what needs doing so that we can have this structure, this, these people in place so that they can help the next generation go forward. And so there was just this overwhelming appreciation for just the thinking, the support in preparing us and helping us to get to the place where we could stand up in that moment and carry the mantle. So
he definitely equipped us, like 100%. He equipped us, he positionally placed us. We were ready. Yeah. We didn't know we were ready, but we were ready. So I suppose after that initial period of just the pain, like the real pain of his loss, and even now, like tearing up, but we will see him again, and that's the joy in life. And he's probably watching us and going, "Go, guys, you crazy too." But he just absolutely believed in us. He believed in everybody, and that's what I take from him.
And I guess that's what probably gives me consolation, because I find that when we go to funerals, I really struggle with this, because I'm thinking, should I be crying this much? Because everybody else is breaking around me, and you can see, I'm going through the same emotions, but I'm probably not feeling as overwhelmed in that sense. And I always wonder whether, is it me holding back, or is it just
I don't know. I'm wondering with you.
I process things very differently.
Yeah.
And I can see him rejoicing. Yes, there's the pain of, his body lays there, his family's going to miss him, he's not going to be there anymore, you're going to miss all of those moments that you shared with him.
Yeah.
But there's also the hope, and that probably takes more of my focus in terms. There's a hope of one of these rapture days.
Well, there's that scripture, isn't it? It says we don't mourn as though we don't have hope.
Yeah.
Yeah. But Jesus wept, right? Jesus, the life, the resurrection himself, wept when Lazarus died, even though he knew that he was going to resurrect him, which is like crazy, isn't it? But I guess there's that allows it actually it's okay to cry. You don't have to not cry.
And I guess that's the thing. I'm not holding myself back. So I'm not trying to, be strong in the moment. Boys don't cry, all of that nonsense. No offense to anyone that says that. Because I do. And I guess it's just, I do allow myself the space to grieve, to recollect, to remember, and to actually appreciate the impact that person would have had in my life.
And so, for you guys, what's your journey of grief like? Have you had significant loss that has actually brought about a positive change in your life? Or have you not really thought about your losses? Have you bottled them up? Have you buried them? And if you're the second one, then you need to watch part 2, which is the next video.